All right. Thank you, Dr. Mitch. Next up, we have Steve Apfelbaum. He is the senior ecologist, founder, and chairman with Applied Ecological Services. Stephen has conducted ecological research, designed award-winning projects, successfully navigated regulatory programs, and contributed his scientific expertise and unique creative approach to over 7,000 projects throughout the United States and the world. He is one of the leading ecological consultants in the United States, providing insight and design solutions at the intersection of ecological systems and developed land uses. Stephen has lectured and spoken on such topics as ecological restoration, ecosystem assessment, alternative stormwater management and conservation development, coastal systems and climate change, soil carbon sequestration, and issues related to land development. In addition, he has authored many studies, papers, books, and ecological restoration plans. His book, Nature's Second Chance, was one of the top 10 environmental books of 2009 by the New York Times. His book, Restoring Ecological Health to Your Land, co-authored with Dr. Alan Haney, is the first comprehensive how-to restoration instructional guide and workbook for landowners interested in sustainable natural landscape. Please help me welcome Steve Apfelbaum.
Thank you. I think I'm going to wander away from this fake sun right here, if I may. The light is very bright. Well, following Bill Mitch is a pleasure. It's been a while since I've seen you, Dr. Mitch. What I wanted to do is provide a sense of how we've been integrating science and design for about 40 years at our company, using a couple of projects, in fact, several projects that you probably as landscape architects have seen in ASLA magazine and the New York Times and all sorts of other publications. So you go look at them if you want, look at the science that's been done, dozens of publications about prairie crossing, and last year alone over 200 articles about prairie crossing, from the economics to the community design basis to the food systems, the energy systems, the alternative stormwater management systems, and a number of other aspects, the charter school and other wonderful things. Kankakee Sands is it's actually a 7,000 acre project that's the first piece of what will hopefully be about 150,000 acre new national wildlife refuge. And I'll tell you about that. That's been published in a series of technical locations. And I'll introduce you to a grazing project that we're doing right now on about 5 million acres of land that's applicable to about 3.5 billion hectares of land on the planet, and then using what we're learning there to inform ranch management and the design of grasslands and restoration of large landscapes. Every one of these projects, including Prairie Crossing, started with science to inform design and has had science engaged in the measurement of the performance of the design. And if there were regulatory drivers, the science has been focused on, in part, the regulatory drivers to make sure those have been achieved. But then every one of these projects, there's literally thousands that I'm not telling you about, where we've managed to fund the science throughout the duration of the project. Some of the projects, we have 40 years worth of science, pre-project, post-project, and we've been monitoring with partners and collaborators. Prairie Crossing started with trying to understand the history of the ecological setting. So the first thing we did was went to, as it turns out, there was a US Supreme Court case contesting the navigability of a watershed of about 400,000 acres in size, 628 square miles, called the Des Plaines River, which starts in southeastern Wisconsin, where I'm from, and wanders down through the Chicago area and confluences with another river. It turns out that the contest over the navigability of that waterway in 1904 started because somebody tried damming the river at the lower end to produce power. And a wonderful friendly agency by the name of the Department of War, predecessor of the Army Corps of Engineers, sued that company that put the dam in. So what there is there's a 40-year record of daily certified engineering stage measurements of the discharge of water coming out of that watershed. that goes back to 1886, and it continues to present day using the same datum. So we went back and looked at that record and began to understand how the hydrology of the watershed changed, of which Prairie Crossing, 700 acres, was a part of. And we began to back the design principles into the history. How could we honor history? How could we use history to create the design for Prairie Crossing? So the way we had 38 different companies initially on the project, 38 different consultants, if only one person from each company showed up. The way we organized the collaboration was around 12 organizing principles. So we didn't ask people to believe what we were going to be talking about. We asked people to agree to organizing principles. And every single idea had to be tested against all 12 of those organizing principles. And that's a far more effective way to build teams. If the culture won't fit, which it will not fit, very predictably, it doesn't fit the first time you work with somebody that speaks a different language. As much as you all try, it doesn't work the way you would typically want it to follow a process. So when you start with principles and you organize the conversation and the decision making around principles, it changes the conversation completely. So one of the principles was we understand the history of land use change and understand the corresponding change in hydrology and hydraulics and water quality of the watershed. And we use that to design a landscape that restores the hydrology, hydraulics, water quality, and delivers hydraulically appropriate hydrographs rather than the predictably unpredictable engineered hydrograph on the upper left. We wanted hydrographs that emulated the historic hydrograph with seasonal high and a trajectory toward a seasonal low. These were pretty simple principles. They're all lined out technically so that the engineers and the ecologists could communicate on what that meant. This is just a graphic portrayal. We then went to modeling and we said, here's what this landscape would need to perform like if it was delivering this, the pointer's not working, if it was delivering this biologically appropriate hydrograph. And people came to agreement, oh, we understand what that means. And that in fact informed the design of the landscapes at Prairie Crossing. We learned that prairies as large intervening landscapes with 4,000 to 10,000 square foot clustered lots could produce the hydrograph that we sought to achieve, and then added to the value by suggesting, by doing demonstration native landscaping projects in home lots, we suggested that we could actually achieve this significantly better if people would take lawns out and install native vegetation. And then we said if we eliminated all the storm sewers in the development, which by the way saved $4.5 million for the project, what would that do? So every incremental change was focused on achieving the principles that we set. And ultimately, I won't share the economics of Prairie Crossing because it's too complicated a project to share the economics on, but I'll give you an example in a minute of this cost savings. It all translated into significant cost savings, about a 54% cost savings compared to conventional development. We also have a lake in Prairie Crossing with 30 to 50 foot horizontal visibilities in a high colloidal clay soil in Chicago. That's impossible to achieve typically. A beach, swimming, and wonderful people now engaged in traditions of land management and stewardship. So here is an economic analysis of another very simple project. This was the developer's design. That is the change that a group of us did in an afternoon. Literally, just changed the design in an afternoon. This is the developer's pro forma, the major line items for grading and paving and concrete and storm sewers and sanitary sewers. We reduced the cost by 32% with just ecological design in one afternoon. This has been fully constructed, and it was a 61% actual cost savings. Add that to the bottom line, these houses in this development, and what I'm not showing you is there's 81 more units in that development. The houses sold for a $100,000 premium, the lots, not the houses. The lots sold for a $100,000 premium, so a 61% cost savings plus a huge premium went right to the bottom line and the developer got it. The other thing we tried doing, and the lighting is so poor with the high intensity light here, I tried for each of the different organism groups, birds and fish and plants and mammals and so forth, we went to the historic documentation and said, you know, these are the numbers of species that we believe to have been present. At the time when the development was initiated, we believe that was what was present not just in Prairie Crossing, but in the neighborhood of Prairie Crossing. And after a period of about a decade, we expected those improvements. And we've blown by those improvements, which has been really, really wonderful. So here's a 7,000 acre project that was the Nature Conservancy's first and primary investment nationally or globally in non-nature. It was all highly industrial agricultural land with 30-foot wide and 15-foot deep ditches. It was the bottom of a glacial lake that was fully drained out in the 1880s, and it's about 15,000 acres in size, and the Nature Conservancy bought about 1/2 of the lake bottom. And our charge was to design a restoration for grasslands and wetlands at this initial scale with hopes that this would be phase 1 of a new national wildlife refuge. Oh wow, the lighting is just terrible. That's the county, that's the 7,000 acres they bought. The first thing we had to look at was that we looked at the history. What was this historic landscape like? And we hired a wonderful historic ecologist, not an old guy that knows about ecology, but a historian that actually focuses on understanding historical ecology. And he put together about a 200-page book about this particular landscape and its history. And that really provided not only data, but a lot of information on what the landscape was like historically and how the land was used historically, commercially, economically, and so forth. The next thing we did was identified all the legal drainage ditches that were in place that we couldn't modify because they're serving multiple farms, multiple properties, and we identified and separated those from those that were just servicing the Nature Conservancy's property, which we could go in and alter. And we went in and altered the above ground. We disabled this about 50,000 lineal feet of tile per acre, underground tile systems. This is just 1 square mile, or I'm showing the existing tile. We use science to understand what plant species to work with. So we collected about 15,000 soil samples and ran them through our greenhouses and did a seed bank analysis to understand what species were going to come out of the seed bank, both the invasive or non-native species and the native species. Why does that matter? It's probably intuitively understandable why it would be important to know where the invasive species were going to be appearing that would need to be managed. But more importantly was for every 1/4 of an ounce of native species we didn't have to add per acre, it translated into $150,000 cost savings over the large scale project. You know, multiply 7,000 acres times 1/4 of an ounce times a cost of about $50 an ounce, $20 an ounce, depending upon the species. So we ended up doing the plan with that information, a restoration plan for about 5,200 acres of wetland, several thousand acres of prairie and savanna. When we phased the plan, we hired the farmers and brought in our own equipment, did the excavation to backfill the ditches, disabled the tiles, and then we brought this machine in that I hope this isn't offensive. We call it a Jesus Christ machine. It's got like 7-foot wide tires that are 6 or 7 foot high, and it walks on water, kind of like, you know where I'm going with this. But every 48 seconds from a boom that covered 200 feet in width, we rained down seed for about 340 locally collected native species. We hired school kids and got community engaged in harvesting the seed at small scale, and then we produced an on-site about a 600-acre nursery in 1 year by taking seed back to our greenhouse and producing about 4 million plants that were brought back and planted. And in 1 year, we came through and we harvested about 10,000 to 20,000 pounds of PLS seed. The project is probably one of the best wet prairie sedge meadow restorations that I'm aware of, that the Nature Conservancy is aware of. It very highly, very, if you look at this picture, wild rice, everything but the typical weeds like Phragmites and canary grass and the normal cattail glauca, the hybrid cattail, those species are not a problem on this site. This project was designed in part to reintroduce whooping cranes across North America. So it had to have scale, and it had to be right in the path of the whooping crane population that goes through central Indiana. The other really interesting opportunity was the engagement by locals, and I just was so impressed. Right now, it's been about 18 years since we started that project. There's children, the children from grade school kids, 8th graders that we hired back 15 years ago. The children from those people are now coming back and working with us. So we're seeing a multi-generational conservation community, which is the right way to engage and the right way to instill Leopoldian ethics into a community rather than through design process. By engaging people in the economy and in placemaking, we've had just a wonderful experience. Ecological performance, I'm not going to bore you with what all this is. This is all Latin, probably Greek to most of you, but those are the scientific names, and then absolute cover, frequency, and so forth. This is plant community measurement performance. Here's another way to look at it, looking at the native species and non-native species performance. Now here's the same thing over time in this particular project, and the same thing over time. Measurements have been part of that project from the very beginning, with definite performance specifications that we had to achieve as a part of the design. I thought it'd be interesting to share with you an example. I already shared with you one example of the economics. Every one of these projects has economic performance criteria and measurements that are economic, not just ecological. So, Bob Costanza's little box over there, Bill, we take those measurements of accounting very seriously as a business, and working for a nonprofit like the Nature Conservancy or anybody else as a client, the economics is absolutely crucial. So we're actually generating a net revenue off this project, which is important for people to realize. That money is being used to set up an endowment for the perpetual maintenance and monitoring and science and student projects for this particular project. We've done this exact same thing on probably 1,000 projects now. So here's a project. Let me take you to another scale. So we're part of a global team looking at climate mitigation strategies. And what we've learned is that probably the greatest scalable, lowest cost strategy on the planet is the restoration of soil carbon in grasslands on the planet. There's about 3.5 billion hectares of grasslands on the planet. How do you begin to work at those scales is what we're doing. So Shell Oil Company and a group of us from Arizona State and Texas A&M and elsewhere. Now this is a presentation we showed to our former president, when she was still our president, at the White House. Sorry, I'm letting my politics out of the bag. We had wonderful reception to thinking big about how to address climate mitigation and climate issues and water supply issues and human food and nutrition issues, all by focusing on grassland restoration. So this is a project where the entire design of the project and the entire design of the use of the land is predicated on a science-driven hypothesis that carbon-rich soil is healthy, beneficial for the entire ecosystem, including human welfare, economics, and animal well-being. And the whole process is based on putting carbon back in the soil. This is the global distribution of soil organic carbon. The circle size is scaled to show you where the soil carbon on the planet is located. And what's interesting to point out is the soil organic carbon is depleted by 60 to 90% globally. Most of the water management on this planet historically was managed by soil organic carbon. I'll give you one piece of evidence. A 1% change in organic carbon in the soils in this region right here equates to about a 12 to 16,000 gallon per acre additional water holding capacity in the soil system. In the soil system. This is not in any engineering models. It's not easily, Tom. You know, Heckrass, Doug Epic we've introduced this as a Stella module, using Stella, because none of the models have enough flexibility. You can change, you know, A, B, C, change the soil type, the slope, change runoff and infiltration rates, but water holding capacity beyond the void space capacity, I'm getting too technical, is not accountable in any of the models. So we went to a research model that we've constructed to be able to get at this. So how do you think we converted the area on the left to look like the area on the right in a period of 3 years? What do you think we did? It'll blow you away. We added 5 times more cattle. We increased the number of cattle and ran them through that landscape. This is bare, hard pan, crusted. The seed bank, the viable seeds were under that soil. What we did was we ran 5 times the carrying capacity that was typically run on this land over that landscape for a period of about 1 day, and then took them off the land for about 90 days. And after 3 years, without the addition of any seed, without any irrigation, without anything, that landscape turned to what you see on the right there. So what we've begun to do is use science and emulate the historic relationship between large grazing herds of ungulates, mammals, and apply those behaviors of those large herds back to the landscape that they used to graze. And it's completely changing. The hydrology, the soil carbon, I'll show you here the infiltration rates. So the science associated with this is probably some of the most remarkably sophisticated science that I've had the honor of working on. We're doing carbon-13 isotope pulsing, where the atmosphere is like 99% carbon-12 isotope, and we're pulsing inside those little plastic tents a carbon-13 isotope, and then we're following the fate of that sequestered carbon dioxide that the plants take up right through to the bacteria, through the root system, basically following its entire life cycle. And we're finding out some remarkable things where we have this adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which is what we call all this. We're finding that, in contrary to what science has been suggesting, so there's different sources of science, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, during Q&A. Most scientists have suggested that grazing ungulates, cattle, deer, bison, wildebeest, are a primary source of methane on the planet. And what we're finding is, in unhealthy grasslands, they are in fact, or can be in fact, a source of methane. But in real time, with this measurement system, we're finding that in real time, the methane that is being emitted by cattle, and I won't tell you how that's emitted, you probably understand that. In real time, it's being sequestered by methanotropes that are in the soil in a healthy grassland, and they're absorbing that methane as quick as it's being released by the farting and belching. I said I wouldn't tell you. The other thing we're doing is we're measuring soil carbon to a meter depth, and we're measuring in real time infiltration changes in the soil, water infiltration. So here, a picture, a ranch that was divided between 2 brothers, and one brother said, oh, screw it, I'm not going to do anything different. I'm going to graze the way mom and dad did for 100 years. And the other brother said, no, I'm going to switch. Hopefully you can see a difference in the soil horizons. It's the exact same soil type with a new fence placed in between them and a 10-year period of time, lapsed time. Well, what was so interesting is the improvements in infiltration. So this is a clay loam soil. There was an additional 27 centimeters per hour of water that was infiltrating, and then the soil carbon level on the right, and you could see in part the signal of that from the darker color, was instead of about 90 tons of carbon per hectare on the left, it was almost 400 tons of carbon per hectare in the image on the right. And where did that carbon come from? Well, it was excessive CO2 from the atmosphere that's been resequestered by plants and with the help of bacteria and soil fungi, converted into recalcitrant soil carbon, organic and inorganic carbon. I won't bore you with the economics, but suffice it to say the preliminary evidence suggests when you increase the herd by 3 to 5 times the carrying capacity, that the revenue and the profit is driven by the herd size, the number of cattle you can sell. And if the animals are healthier because the range is healthier, it means the ranchers are healthier. They're not dividing their ranch and selling it off because they can't pay the taxes. So there's thousands of projects that we've had the honor and pleasure of working on. This is not one that we worked on. We converted that into this, and every one of these projects requires engineering and hydraulics analysis, hydrology analysis, water quality work. It requires design. I don't know what it took to design the one on the left there. I don't even want to speculate. But every one of these projects requires a team and it requires collaboration. To figure out how we can convert this steep bluff face on Lake Michigan to that, we had to really do a slope stability analysis and try to understand what removal and reduction of invasive tree cover would do. That's the exact same site before and after. We didn't add any seeds. All we did was stimulated the seed bank in that project. And it's all native savanna forest grasses coming back on the right. This is a wonderful project, 15 million acres in size, and the normal solution for flood damage reduction has been build huge reservoirs, 20 square mile, 30 square mile reservoirs. And a group of us said, well, what if we built huge wetlands, restored agricultural land to wetlands? So this is 3 square miles that you're looking at. And here's the performance data, the hydrograph, which is the rainfall distribution, and this is the hydrograph coming out of that complex. The exact same acreage, a big reservoir. Here is the hydrograph coming out of that reservoir. And what's so interesting is we had nearly, you probably can't see it from the back, but we had 2 rain events of over 2 inches of rain feeding into this hydrograph. And here we had 1 rain event of about 1.75 inches. So just significantly, nearly double the rainfall on the same acreage. And the reservoir, the depressional storage area, the volume, essentially identical between the 2 images. And look at what the wetland is doing for flood storage, the slow release, the slow rise of the hydrograph and the slow release of the hydrograph, as opposed to the very attenuated and spiky. That's not a hydrology term, but you all understand that. Without performance data, you can't make the economic case. You can't make the regulatory case. You can't make the case with the farming community that there's an alternative to taking 20 square miles or 10 square miles of ag land out of production, and that alternative might require the same land or more land, but it is better for the community, better for downstream parties that are going to pick up this runoff. What do you do with oak savanna systems? Right here, one of the opportunities for the bringing together of science and design here, boy, you're in a desert here with regard to restoration. What we've learned working from just south of here in upstate New York through Pennsylvania and out east, there's so many myths and misconceptions around what the ecology of this area used to be like. You've forgotten about complete ecosystems that were the most common ecosystems here. oak savannas and swamp white oak wetlands were common here. And most of your swamp white oak wetlands had converted into red maple swamps. And everybody thinks that is what was here historically. So what you really need here is a grounding in a science and a design-based a program that can begin actually challenging some of the myths and assumptions about your local area, in my opinion. I'll just, how do you take, you've got wonderful, really disturbed mine lands in Pennsylvania. Wonderful because you learn a lot when everything that supports life has been eliminated from the landscape on a mine spoil, pH of 3, and there's no organic matter, no nitrogen, no phosphorus. You have a lot that you can do to use that as an experimental laboratory. Like Bill said, converting, this is a zinc lead mine site, and that's it 3 months later. How do you make those conversions? It's not a design issue. It's a very technical science issue. And then you layer in design with testing. That's also layered in with the science, if that makes sense. How do you convert downtown Milwaukee, a brownfield site into a magnificent new, I don't know if you like the Milwaukee, whatever, the Brewers, if you like, this is right across from the Brewers Stadium. How do you begin to work with these brownfield sites? Pennsylvania, this area has quite a few of those. Between here and Akron, you could spend your whole life thinking about what to do with those systems. How do you reuse old industrial sites? This is a wonderful Northerly Island project that a whole group of us have had the honor of, Old Meigs Field. I'm a pilot, and I landed my plane there many times, and I'm really sad to see that airport gone, but that's another story. How do you take mines, like the coal mines and the other hard rock mines that you have here? You've got a wonderful learning laboratory here in Pennsylvania that you could use to make these conversions. Regulatory issues and science issues and design issues. This is called Lake Wazee County Park. It's the hottest new scuba diving lake in the Midwest. It's 350 feet deep. I'd never scuba dive there. So the other part of the science that we're working on is the monitoring. We're trying to do monitoring at very large scales. So we bought just what everybody needs, a $300,000 airplane and $1 million camera. What do you do with something like this? We're measuring down to centimeter on-ground scale in multispectral and hyperspectral, actually identifying plant species to species and doing very precise precision conservation, we call it, where we go out and do management and maintenance at those scales. We're using this on job sites before we do design to do very precise topographic mapping, very precise mapping, just remarkable technology. And I think with that, I'll just bring these summary points up for you guys. Every ecological process or project really must be informed and tested by science, in our opinion, especially on larger landscapes. In our opinion, there's no economic justification for not testing with the best tools, including the science information. Projects that proceed without science, in our opinion, have contributed to false misunderstandings and conclusions. And I think it's seriously flawed some of the design community thinking. For example, untested science on the novel ecosystem theory, that's never been tested scientifically. That's nonsense. When you really get down to testing it, it doesn't hold water. It really comes from the definition of, oh yes, whatever's growing on that site wasn't there historically, and when we tried to restore it, we couldn't restore it, therefore it's a novel plant community. That's the essence of the arguments. Doesn't make any sense unless you really design an experimental program to test it. So we've done that on mining projects, and we've been able to create very, very diverse plant and animal communities. And it's, ground up rock with no nutrients. Generalizations about stormwater BMPs contributes misinformation. You know, BMPs have been tested, if they've been tested technically, in a few places and then they're applied broadly. We found that they simply don't work. In some locations, they don't work at all, and in other locations, they don't work seasonally, and understanding the temporal and spatial dynamics. Scaling engineering from site scale to watershed scale really hasn't been tested well throughout the world. There's attempts at it, and there are some good calibration projects, but there's an awful lot of generalizations that we've seen that don't, and especially with regard to ecotoxicology, especially with contaminants in the ecosystem, contaminant mobility. Each of these is a research opportunity for you guys. Use of native plant cultivars to support native insect biodiversity and pollinators. It's not been tested. You know, we're making all the assumptions that if we apply a landscape architectural palette and their cultivars, that we're going to achieve the same results of the native species. It's not been tested. We have tested it on some projects in limited scope, and it's not panning out to be even remotely true. So I caution prudence and cautionary design. Science contributes to improved economics, ecology, and designs that perform, and all projects should be viewed as learning opportunities. So I think with that, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for coming. I'm going to quickly thank our sponsors.
Sure. I'm sorry?
Your drive is still attached over here.
Oh, that's fine. Not a problem.
Steve, I need to get the mic from this, right?